Hello, and welcome to the UK Democracy Network's second How To workshop. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This session is being recorded and will be made available to Democracy Network members. So if you're watching this recording after the event, then a very warm welcome to you too. We'll be fielding questions as part of this workshop, but if you're watching this back later at a later date and have any further questions, then please do feel free to get in touch and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So my name's James Moulding and I'm the UK Democracy Network's Network Development Lead. And if you're not familiar with our work, the UK Democracy Network works to strengthen the relationships and connections between organisations, projects and individuals working to build a healthier democracy in the UK, providing member organisations and individuals with the resources, information and collaboration opportunities they need to take their work to the next level. We are a UK-wide network spanning Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England, and membership is free to open to all working on or around issues of democracy, power and voice in the United Kingdom. So as I say, this is our second How To workshop, and we'll be running these regular workshops, providing you, the organisations, projects, campaigners and practitioners of the democracy sector with the tools, concepts and learning from the experts within and outside the democracy movement. In today's session, our guest speaker, Chloe Shandor-Wilson from the Disability Policy Centre, will be unpacking some of their findings from their 2021 representation report and walking us through with some of the ways in which, as democracy organisations, we can break down those barriers that exist for disabled people and people with learning disabilities and those with additional needs to fully engage with both political processes and the public sphere and within our own organisations. Chloe has been working with people with learning disabilities for many years in Bournemouth, with the Chatterboxes scheme, grassroots group working to improve representation of young people with disabilities in Dorset, and Chloe is now a member of the YMCA East Surrey Board of Trustees. And before co-founding and setting up the Disability Policy Centre in 2021, Chloe worked in both local and national government as a political advisor on equality and diversity. Since launching on International Day of Disabilities back in December 2021, Disability Policy Centre, the UK's first think tank of its kind, has worked to advance and improve policy to change the lives of disabled people in the UK for good. In this session, Chloe will run us through their work in this workshop for approximately about an hour, taking us into a deep dive into that space of improving accessibility. So during this session, we may break out into Zoom breakout rooms. And as always, if you have any urgent clarifying questions throughout the session, do feel free to raise your hand or use the Zoom raise hand function in the bottom panel below. And yeah, just lastly from me, before we get stuck in, if you'd like to hear any more from us about any future upcoming workshops, or you'd like to get more involved in the work of the UK Democracy Network, just let us know in the chat or sign up in the final right-hand column on that check-in spreadsheet that I just posted. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Chloe. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chloe.
Thank you, James. Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to be here with all of you. My name is Chloe Shandor-Wilson, as James said, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Disability Policy Centre. I'm just going to share my... Oh, I would like to... Is it possible for me to share my screen, James? Sorry, I should have covered that before. That was my mistake, but just to... Here we are. Thank you. Can you all see my screen okay? Have you got it? Perfect. So I've just got a slideshow to talk through. So yes, I'm one of the founders of the Disability Policy Centre, and basically we are a relatively new organisation. As James said, we set up in December of 2021. We launched on the International Day of People with Disabilities, and we are a think tank. So we have set up to essentially bring together the disability sector and the relevant charities, campaigners, advocacy groups, policymakers, and then academics. And what we've done for the last 2 years is to coalesce around a series of different topics, whether that's education, transport, employment, and we've held events bringing relevant sort of stakeholders together, and we've written reports as to what we think policy should be that can improve the lives of disabled people and people with long-term health conditions. And yeah, I think that's all to say about us. So I was going to start with a question, and I'd like us to split up into groups of pairs or threes or fours, and we've got 10 minutes basically. I'd like you all to think about, how do you think that disabled people or people with long-term health conditions might be excluded from the democratic process? And also within your own organisations, what do you think the barriers are there as well? So two sort of questions. One, how do you think people are excluded from democracy itself? And how do you think they might be excluded from your organisation as a whole as well? So we'll have about 10 minutes. If we come back here at 10:02, that would be great. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you had some good discussions, and we certainly did in our group. Would anyone from group 2 like to feedback, or we got a couple of minutes, would people just like to call out some ideas that they thought that were interesting? Can be from any group.
Yeah, I was saying the same, that we'll follow the respite and the intensive, like, not being easily, and also, like, the transport as well. The transport are the most, like, accessible, especially the way that they come to the day centres and the respite. And it's like ridiculous how the public buses, they have support with wheelchair accessibility.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this coming through with disability? We think that's like something like easily that people can understand and know what it is. If you had the letters, right, from anywhere, right, for the disability, people might not understand it.
Yeah.
Mm.
We were talking about transport as well, Corinda. Joanne, you had some points on transport, didn't you? We were saying it feeds into everything, that people don't really see it as a sort of exciting or interesting topic, but the fact that it's so inaccessible makes an impact on someone's area of life in every single way.
It does, because if you can't get to a place, then you can't be included. So, yeah, it really does. And the same goes for buildings. If buildings aren't accessible, then you miss out on so many events. That's why it's important to have online hybrid. If a building isn't accessible, to offer that.
Yeah, definitely. Did anyone else from group 2 have anything that they wanted to share? I don't want to pick on anyone. Charlie, did you have anything?
No, I think ours was summed up. We just said it was challenging that quite often when we're working with people, I work with young adults, because disabilities aren't always obvious. People just assume we're not working with them, with young people who would identify themselves as having one, and therefore sometimes our work is not valued in that sense. But we also have a Yorkshire SEND Alliance, which Chelsea heads up. So yeah,
that's good. Yeah, and Graham, you had a point on that as well, didn't you, around in universities, the differences between the sort of diversity of disability as well.
Yeah, so I think there were a couple of points. One was that I think certainly from my my workplace, we're really strong on dealing with ethnicity issues and with gender issues. We've kind of got very, very sort of very strong structures in those spaces, but it's really noticeable that disability doesn't have the same level of prominence, and I think partly that's because that we don't have the same level of advocates for those things, for disability issues, as we do for gender and ethnicity within the work environment already. I think partly this is also because I think people are finding it hard to think this category disabled captures so many different types of disability. So, for example, we've been just talking about predominantly issues about wheelchair accessibility, but there are other sorts of disabilities which you know don't you know will require very different sort of will require different policies to respond to. And I think a lot of workplaces are really still trying to conceptualize what the range of sort of issues are here, even beginning to sort of recognize that. And so things like wheelchair accessibility isn't dealt with well, but it's recognized. But there are other forms of disability, I think, that we just don't even think about, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, like we were saying in our group as well, sort of 20% of the UK population identify as being disabled, which is obviously you know, incredibly high number. But in terms of the stats, you know, I think it's 49% of disabled people are unemployed. The employment gap is about 30% between disabled people and non-disabled adults in this country. Disabled people predominantly are more likely to be excluded from school because maybe an invisible disability isn't identified, and they're put, you know, and children are essentially excluded because of behavioural issues and things like that. But a lot of the time, the underlying cause is someone has a disability that nobody picked up. Results in sort of education and higher education are much higher as well. But all of it starts really with sort of representation. There's not enough people making decisions at the table that represent disabled people. We found in our report, which I'll go on to now, but we found in our report that only 8 out of 650 MPs have identified that they're disabled or they have some sort of disability like dyslexia. And that's obviously a huge number. And in terms of local government, the number's quite high. It's about 16% of councillors are disabled, but again, that's still not 20%. And if you think about the numbers, that's still about 700 people short of being 20%. So we really have a democracy that is not representative at all. Before we go into the presentation, Corinda, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, like, for the example, what you were saying, you know, like people with disabled people, I feel like some of the universities and some of the colleges and schools with disabled people are not enough education to understand, like, for their career, and like some of what Kirsten was saying and what you were saying earlier about the university, I think a lot of it is from communication, like communication, so like people with understanding the needs and understanding the benefit and all that, but they're not really focusing on the people. They're more focusing on themselves, which is unfair.
Thanks, Corinda. And Joanne, well, just a quick point, if that's all right, and then we're going to go on to the presentation.
I just wanted to say that all your statistics are reflective of Northern Ireland, but yeah, Northern Ireland statistics is even kind of worse, because disabled people are 1 in 4 in Northern Ireland, which is almost 25%, and there's only a handful of our MLAs that could be considered disabled or identify as disabled. Yeah. So yeah, it's even worse in Northern Ireland.
Blimey, thank you. And like you said, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
I'm going to head on to our presentation, which is basically going through some of the findings of our report. So this is the first report that we did, which was in the early 2022. We released this, and we had it endorsed by both the current minister, there's been a few since then, and then also Lord Blunkett as well. Both sort of endorsed the sort of findings of our report. But as we've said before, disabled people make up 20% of the population of the United Kingdom. As Joanne said, you know, in some places like Northern Ireland, that's even higher. But only 1% of MPs and 16% of councillors have come out publicly and identified that they're disabled. Some of the things that we found, so we basically interviewed people who were involved in politics. So we interviewed disabled councillors, disabled members of parliament, people that were involved in party politics, and then people that were sort of involved in sort of campaigning and advocacy. But it was mainly around the sort of party political space. So people that have been through the process and been involved in a political party or stood for local government as an independent before. And 82% of the people that we spoke to said that they got involved in politics as a result of their disability. So they were passionate about what they'd experienced and how much needed to change about the system around them. And that was their reason for getting into politics. But 72% of those said that they didn't feel comfortable declaring their disability to their political party because they thought that they would be discriminated against. And we had some really sort of harrowing stories of where that does happen, you know, in several of the parties. It's not, and it doesn't even matter at what level, but there was a real sort of underlying feeling of, if I want to be a local councillor, or I want to put myself down the party political route, I better not tell anybody about my disability because they're going to use it against me, which was really upsetting, really. We found that 2 out of 5 of the local authority pages, this is from another source, I think this was Scope did this research, but 2 and 5 of the local authority web pages failed to meet their basic tests. So even when people were to engage with their local council, when we're to go on the web page, nearly half of the time people wouldn't even be able to sort of access it. It wasn't fully web accessible. A lot of local councils don't do things like allowing people to use video calls or find other ways of contacting people. And also the accessibility of local authority buildings was still a major cause for concern. We even heard a story of 2 councillors at a particular council that were locked out of a council meeting because essentially the room wasn't accessible for them. And we've heard stories as well of people basically being told by their council officers, once they're elected, this is the way we do things, and if you don't like it, then just get on with it, essentially. So people raising complaints around local authority buildings not being accessible, or a venue not being accessible for a council meeting from an elected councillor, and basically being told by officers, oh, there's nothing we can do, like this is just the way it is. So and then on the positive side, we had a really nice story of a councillor who was disabled, or is disabled, and because they were then elected, they were then able to change a lot of the practices in that local authority. So they introduced sort of assistive technology for the staff, and they were able to improve the workplace itself in the council. And if they weren't there as a seat at the table, then it wouldn't have happened. So some of our reports, we also had some recommendations for political parties. Apologies if anyone can hear my washing machine in the background. I didn't realise you could hear it from here, but you can. Some of the recommendations from the government was to use the Restoration and Renewal Programme in the House of Parliament to properly review the accessibility of Parliament. It's completely inaccessible space, not enough sort of lifts, not enough sort of hearing loops. It's even, there was, I don't know if anybody's seen, but even Robert Halfon, who is the minister, when he sat at the dispatch box, he's a disabled man, he has to sit at the dispatch box and is able to use a sort of assistive technology, which is fine. Of course, it's good that they made a reasonable adjustment, but really it shouldn't be the case that someone who's disabled can't sit on the front bench. You should be able to allow for these sorts of things, that somebody does make it the position of being a minister, you know, why is Parliament not accessible for them? Why can you not sit in Parliament as a member of Parliament if you're a wheelchair user? And I understand, obviously it's a very old building, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And really the time is now. They're talking about reviewing it. They're talking about restoration and renewal and how they're going to reshape Parliament. So now really is the time to look at this. And we've had a meeting with the Houses of Parliament team since then, which is positive. They are doing some work, but it's just continuing to sort of push. And again, to conduct a review in terms of local authority buildings. And our final 2 for the government were to introduce a formal funding scheme. So there used to be something called the Enable Fund, as well as the Access to Elected Office Fund, which meant that if you were disabled or you had a long-term health condition, you could apply to the government to reimburse some of your costs. So things like if you needed to pay for a personal assistant to support you while you were campaigning, if you couldn't access public transport and you had to pay for transport, and also delivery networks. Those are really, really important, particularly for people that might be standing for a smaller party or standing as independents. You need the support to get your literature out there and to get your, to get your manifesto out there. And, canvassing and going door to door isn't always accessible for people. And it's not always accessible for people to stay in for long periods of time and to use all of that energy. So you used to be able to apply for a fund to the government to support you with that. That stopped in 2020 when the elections were cancelled during the pandemic, and it hasn't been reinstated. So that's something that we've been really campaigning on with a lot of our partners. And we're really pleased, actually, the government have said in their latest disability action plan that they're going to review this. So hopefully, we're hoping, us and our charity partners that we've been campaigning on this with, we're hoping that this could be a good win that they would hopefully look to do between now and the end of this parliament. And the last thing as well was, we think that political parties should report annually to the government on what measures they're putting in place. And this is a real issue, actually. So the reason why the first fund was scrapped and wasn't reinstated, the line from the government was, we should put the onus on the parties. They're clearly not doing enough. Discrimination clearly goes on in political parties. Parties clearly aren't doing enough to sort of support disabled candidates. But it just didn't seem to happen. But we do think that there should be some sort of level of accountability. And we actually had a conversation with one of our partners the other day in a similar sort of workshop. Was, the EHRC, they've looked into things like anti-Semitism in particular parties. They've looked into things like all women shortlists. Why is nothing really being done about this clear lack of representation and the discrimination that does go on? So we think there should be a measure of accountability to the parties as well, to make sure they're meeting their standards, whether that's from the government or whether that's from someone else. And just other key areas, as we've spoken about, everything impacts disabled people, and there are a lot of policy areas that impact disabled people completely disproportionately. So we've spoken about welfare reform, we've spoken about employment, the fact that the disability employment gap is so huge. But even when you think about things like climate change and the conversation at the moment around sort of low emission zones, it's important to make sure that climate justice is inclusive of disabled people and that disabled people are not being left behind. So a lot of the conversations around scrapping cars, which is obviously fantastic for the environment, we need to understand the level of, just as we've spoken about, a lot of public transport isn't accessible for disabled people. So we need to make sure that we're, one, improving the public transport, but secondly, we're also making sort of adjustments. And they have been one recently, I know with you, Les, that they're going to make certain exemptions for disabled people and for carers. But it's just important to understand that some of these debates, is not as nuanced as they might seem, are more nuanced than they might seem. And it's important that we don't leave disabled people out of the conversation. The closure of ticket offices, again, is a good one that sort of seems to be driven through at the moment. It's going to make public transport completely inaccessible for so many people, and some elderly people too. And again, the cost of living is disabled people are disproportionately impacted by the cost of living at every turn. So there's lots of research that's been done by charities and also universities over the last year or so. Scope did a research report that said that disabled people spend on average about £600 a month more than non-disabled people on their basic costs of living. Energy price rises impact disabled people more than non-disabled people. Food price rises impact disabled people more than non-disabled people. And there's been some polling and some research done recently showing that disabled people are much more likely than non-disabled people to be anxious and nervous about sort of the current situation and to sort of feel like they are more trapped by it as well. So it's really important to improve representation because all of these issues impact people, and it's right that we all do our bit to make sure people have a seat at the table and have a voice in our democracy. And just quickly for sort of a couple of minutes is, in terms of organisations themselves, I know we've touched on it, that disability seems to be the last sort of strand of EDI that is being looked at, which appears to be true, and that's sort of very much the feeling in the disability sector. So just a couple of sort of key ideas is, one, obviously making sure that you're listening to the voices of disabled people across all sort of consultation that you're doing, that people have a seat at the table, whether that's through relevant sort of staff networks or whether that's through your relationships as democratic organisations with sort of disability networks and disabled people's organisations. It's about getting the basics right. It's about making sure that, are all of your events accessible? Are they held in accessible spaces? Do you have BSL interpreters? Have you given the option to people to make sure that they're asking for reasonable adjustments? So when you send out invites and you ask for dietary requirements, do you ask for access requirements? Do you make sure that everybody feels that they can tell you what their access requirements are and that they can ask for things, whether that's online and related to sort of digital accessibility and closed captions and things like that, or whether that's related to sort of an in-person event? We saw the stats around people who don't feel comfortable disclosing their disability. So what you can do as an organisation is making sure that you're offering up the ability to make people feel comfortable in disclosing these kind of things to you and disclosing what their access needs are. Communications can say a lot. Do you put out, we put on our reports, for example, we always put out sort of a PDF format of our reports, but we always would do a large print, we do an easy read for people with learning disabilities, and we do an audio report as well, just to make sure we've got sort of all bases covered, and people can contact us if they want to request Braille too. All videos should have captions on them. All images that you put on social media should have alt text. You should think about your colours that you use. And also, again, as I said, only 2 in 5 council web pages were, 3 in 5 were accessible. So has anybody ever audited your website? We can actually provide the web auditing now. We've got a partnership with an organisation that do this, that want to support sort of charities and smaller organisations. So we do actually have the ability to do that if anybody ever wanted to use that service through us. And then in terms of you as employers, so both Labour and the Conservatives have put a big drive on this year, which we hope is a good thing and will mean that whoever is in government in the next Parliament will put forward some real changes. But there are huge issues, obviously, around the welfare system itself. But in terms of employment, do you offer assistive technology? When you recruit, do you ask people if, you know, do they need any reasonable adjustments? Is there anything they need to provide? I think the stats, I did write this down yesterday, I think the stats are something like only 1/3 of people that apply for jobs that are disabled feel comfortable disclosing that to their employer, again, because they think they're going to be discriminated against. So are you sort of preempting things? Are you asking people, do they need any reasonable adjustments for you at recruitment process and when people are employed, or your volunteers as well? And again, we spoke about this, you know, do you provide flexible and remote working, access to work? Obviously, that's from the government, but do you offer it, or do you have that conversation with new employees or people in your networks? And again, who has caring responsibilities? Is that something that people feel they can ask? I know that myself and my co-founder, when we first started, I'm a carer for a family member, and my co-founder is a disabled woman. And that was really great for us because we both were really understanding of, you know, I had to take a morning off to support my family member, or she would have to take an afternoon off to go to a doctor's appointment or whatever it might be. And there was no judgment there. The culture was obviously from both of us. We really understood the barriers that both of us were facing. But sometimes when you're employed, that can be very challenging, and people can feel that their employer doesn't always understand that sort of thing. So just in terms of you as a culture, you know, are you sort of meeting your legal obligations, or are you sort of going above and beyond? And again, we can always support with any of these kind of things. And there are plenty of other sort of charities and organisations too that do similar work. And then the last thing, so if we go back into breakout rooms for about just under 10 minutes, what steps are you going to take from this to improve the representation of disabled people? It could be in your organisation and it could be in general. We could do both. So what are you going to do within your organisation and within your place as sort of democratic organisations to improve the representation of disabled people and people with long-term health conditions? So I think we'll go for about another 10 minutes if that suits everyone, and then we'll come back and wrap up.
Sorry, Corinda.
Like me, I was 40, and then it's take us out from the breakout room.
Oh, yeah, I think we had finished. I was just saying, well, what we were saying to our group was we were saying about funding for, it would be helpful if funding was available for small businesses or large businesses to make their venues more accessible, so that, you know, someone can cover that cost. And there are places out there like the City Bridge Trust, which is a fund from, you know, the City of London. They do cover things in London. You can apply for grants to cover costs for upgrading your venue, but obviously that's sort of very few and far between. So we were just saying that would be a useful thing for businesses and venues to be able to apply for money to upgrade their services to be more accessible. So we've just got a couple of minutes left, so just to finish off, does anyone want to give some feedback about what they are going to do to make their organisation or the democratic process itself more accessible for disabled people? Monica, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just talking about some of the challenges we face at our organisation in trying to reach out to and engage with as diverse a group as possible when governmental departments say to us, get involved in this consultation process within this really limited time frame, and oh, by the way, it's in person in London. And I think that we have a really important role to play to push back and say this actually isn't acceptable. We don't have enough time to make sure that the people that are representing the experiences that need to be there, can be engaged with meaningfully and access this. So, yeah, being the kind of critical friend when it comes to those kind of really important relationships, to ensure that they really are hearing from as broad a range of people as possible, and not just the people who we already have relationships with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. It is. It's important to do, to keep pushing and use that voice.
Yeah, I think when you're part of an influencing team, and so much of your work is about influencing policy from the inside, you forget that you have a really important role to play in saying this is a really unacceptable process, and actually we will help you, but we'll help you if you do X, Y, and Z. And these are the principles that we work by. It really hard to do. You sometimes feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I think if we are going to try and progress this agenda as an organisation, as a collective, then we have to be pushing back when we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anyone else have any thoughts? Gary, I'm aware we haven't heard from you yet. Would you like to share? I know your camera's off, but if you were there.
Yeah, sorry. I was just discussing, because I work for a students' union, and we have had a major shift in how we do a democracy. We've moved from a council type of environment where usually it's one person speaks and they're the loudest, to having more of a deliberation base. But I don't think we've necessarily got that right for students that identify themselves as having disabilities. I know that we've got to do more work there, and for me, we've just brought in place this new network of students, the Disabled Association, which we just hired a disabled student to help deliver on. And it's about trying to, a lot like what Monica was saying, trying to find out actually what disabled students necessarily need from us, and what options are there, because we've got the technology is there to help us do other amazing, wonderful stuff, to hear the voices of so many different student demographics. But are we needing to use it or not? I don't know, but we need to hear the voices from the variety of different disabled students that we'll actually have, and to put options potentially in place. And I would like to have our Disabled Association start leading on that work.
Absolutely, that sounds fantastic. It's so important to have that voice, and to keep allowing that sort of grassroots representation as well.
Yeah,
that sounds really good.
Yeah, because one thing that we're also trying to do, because a lot of students, they would not have engaged democratically whilst they was growing up. At school, it doesn't happen, and sometimes when someone at the age of 18, 19, 20 comes to university, it'll be the first time that potentially they could get involved in politics, or have a vote, have a say, and we want that to be the first step into politics, so that once they've actually voted in the student union election, or they've had a look at policy, that then they'll go into their local elections, the mayoral elections, and then that'll transform into other votes elsewhere, and paying attention to what is happening around, because everything affects everyone. And and within 5 years, the landscape of what we're experiencing now is going to massively and significantly change.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
No, you're right, and I mean, I know from personal experience that student unions are so important at getting young people politically active, and it's about being as inclusive as possible.
Yeah.
I was a big SU type, so I completely understand.
Yeah.
So we're at we've just gone past. Did anyone else have anything we wanted to add before we hand back over to James to close?
Just going on from what Gary said about sort of representation of of having sort of that democracy within a student union. I think sort of looking at even younger, looking at younger people, like you just said yourself, it doesn't start in education. They're not learning about this school. A lot of people don't really come in, you know, understand or learn anything around sort of democracy or politics until they, or if they do go to university. And in some instances, the barriers around young people, you know, going to university with who have special educational need and disability are already there. So, you know, it's having those conversations with sort of young adults and young people around democracy as well, and starting sort of earlier than that. So I think, you know, having representation, and I think in sense of my role, trying to increase that representation of young people and young adults within democracy is very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's crucial. Like you said, as we all know, you know, given our experience and the sector that we work in, but if you can break those barriers down for disabled people at that age, then it will just, yeah, it could open up so many doors for people. So I'm just about to I'll put my email in the chat and our website as well. If you do have any questions, or just as, for example, you know, we were saying before, if you say, oh, look, we'd love to, have you got the link to a BSL interpreter, or have you got the link to someone that can support us with our employment, or whatever it might be? We've got plenty of contacts in this space now, so just feel free to just drop me a line, and we can help in any way we can. But yeah, thanks all of you for having me. It's been really good. And James, I'll hand back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Chloe. This has been really interesting. And I guess as I was just thinking myself as well, like me and Helen were just chatting on Slack as you were just finishing off there about, we're now planning to have a sort of review of all of the things that we do, our comms and events and the stuff. So it really is a democracy network for everyone, rather than we're improving.
Good.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. This has been really interesting. If you're interested in following up, joining the network or joining the Disability Policy Centre, Chloe's put the website in there. And if you're interested in sharing some news and updates and stuff, and signing up to either Disability Policy Centre or the ongoing work of the Democracy Network, you can check out this spreadsheet in the chat that we talked about right at the very start. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing more of you in the future. And good luck with all of your work on, you know, like improving accessibility in your organizations. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chloe.
James. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Lovely
so
to meet
much.
you.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. See you.
thanks, James and Chloe. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.